Beautiful. We have another introduction here, and it's actually quite a big video today because it is going to be a weekly and a bi-weekly closure here for CME coming in later tonight in, I believe, just a few hours, actually. So a lot of things to prepare for, but we're going to be focusing in this video a little bit more on the shorter term here for Bitcoin. And without further ado, let's go into perhaps a little bit of a new setup. I want to just acknowledge here on the bi-weekly time frame for CME, which again is closing in 5 hours, 30 minutes, and 12 seconds and counting. We do see that there is barely a fresh twist of the bi-weekly MACD once again to the upside, gaining momentum here. Yes, this is a very aggressive read, but I do want to point out as well that the volatility coming off of the BBWP indicator here is raising alongside that momentum turning up. So, you know, the way that I read this is that overall this cycle is in kind of like the advancement phase. Like, it gets crazier is what I'm trying to say. You know, we're in the crazy zone right now. We're in the crazy zone. And ultimately, you know, I don't personally think that there's like that much in this cycle in terms of timing. However, this is still, you know, ultimately a bullish bias here, nonetheless. And also when we look at the bi-weekly CME price action pivots trendline extensions here, we can see that the current trajectory of it would be coming in on the top end at about $145,000. And of course, once we get to next week, that's actually going to raise up almost another $5,000 to $150,000 US. So, you know, the longer that Bitcoin just kind of, you know, takes its times moseying around, the higher and higher that target will naturally get. And I suspect that we will very likely see a high somewhere around there. Now, in terms of what price would Bitcoin need to close above today in order to continue to see this momentum rise coming into the next week, well, we need to see Bitcoin close above $10,000. Yes, $10,000. No problem, sir. $108,500. So kind of crazy right there. We are dealing with big numbers after all. But yeah, that's the girthiness of this asset. Very girthy, very powerful, and still actually bullish. Anyways, again, this is more or less a higher term time frames. We can combine this with a couple of the other sort of 14-day setups here. In fact, one of the ones that we were looking at recently was the bi-weekly CME Bitcoin indicator for the, bi-weekly CME indicator, the bi-weekly HPDR indicator for CME here, again, closing later today. And I would say that Bitcoin would effectively put itself in a very powerful position for expansion to, you know, new all-time highs within the next 2 weeks. If Bitcoin could close above the 50% level at the end of today, again, a little bit less than 5.5 hours left to go, that would be a price officially at about $118,900 US. Right now, Bitcoin on CME trading about almost $1,000 below that pivot. So if it can close above there by the end of today, then I would be looking at that as a setup. Again, coming into the next 2 weeks of price action, Bitcoin very likely to make new all-time highs. I want to see where these ranges open up coming into next week, but, you know, presumably, you know, that would probably put Bitcoin into like the very deep 120s in the relatively short term. And if things get really crazy, then, you know, we do see the 77.6 level here coming in around $140,000 US. By the way, this red circle is coinciding with the 3-week time frame setup that we've been speaking about as well. Won't go over it in this video because it's not closing for another couple weeks, but yeah, you can see how all of these things are really starting to come around each other. On top, they're coming around each other. We're all coming around each other. I'm coming, you're coming, we're all coming. And well, Bitcoin coming down right now, so perhaps we're getting cummed on. Anyways, I wanted to also go back to the moon setup. Yes, everyone's favorite setup, the most controversial setup in all of cryptocurrency land. But at the end of the day, all we care about is statistics and results from those. And this one so far has actually been working out, you know, decently well. I want to acknowledge here that again, this is effectively operating within a 2-week time frame spread as well. And because it already did fire off when Bitcoin was around $116,000 US, we can measure from that day about 15 days out, and that puts us into the last week of July. So we look for this one again to play out until then. And looking at statistics from this, again, just super simply opening up along whenever, you know, Bitcoin gets the bull moon, and then the bear moon, the Angus moon. And as we can see here, you know, over time it has led to a positive, a positive equity curve, which we like. But most importantly, in the strategy statistics, we can see that the average winning trade returns about 13.5%. The average losing trade losing about 8%. So, you know, this one does look a lot more likely to me to be a winning trade. And because the average winning trade returns about 13.5%, well, for about the last 10 years, I should add as well. Well, what would that look like on top of current price action? And does that coincide with some of the other things that we've been looking at? Well, yes, 130,000 US dollars. Again, giving us a date around the very end of, of July. So we're talking about the next 2 weeks of price action, basically into the very end of July / beginning of August. And I do expect that things, get a little bit crazier from here. After this week was more or less a consolidation after breaking to new all-time highs. Now, speaking of that, I wanted to bring back kind of like I want to call it like a secret chart, and then we'll get into the short term. But I do want to again acknowledge here that for Bitcoin on the yen, which I kind of look at as like I don't want to call it a secret chart, but kind of is in a way, just because a lot of the signals here and structural signals do seem to work well. We can see that this week, despite Bitcoin making new all-time highs, has pulled back to test effectively the exact point of the prior all-time high in January of this year. So, this could be read as a retest of a breakout. And as long as Bitcoin's above there, have to be looking up and to the right. Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin can't break down or anything like this. We'll go over breakdown conditions a little bit later. As always, we stay neutral on this channel and we go over statistics and sort of, what to expect if Bitcoin confirms breakouts up or down in either way. But in this case, if you just want a very nice and easy line in the sand, that would be, well, actually, I'm not necessarily sure what that correlates to on US dollars. I guess the low of this week thus far. Let's call it like 115,500 or so. So as long as Bitcoin's above there, kind of have to be looking at this as just a nice consolidation at new all-time highs. Anyways, moving on from there, I want to go now into the shorter term of the price action. Looking at the daily price action statistics indicator, we can see that Friday is, there's a couple things of great interest here. One, Friday is definitely more weighted in favor of bullish or positive closures, I should say, rather than negative closures. It is kind of tied neck and neck for Monday, which with about 54.5% of all of those Fridays closing positively since 2023 began, which was the beginning of this bull market cycle. Now, I do want to also state that the average returns for Friday on those positive closing Fridays is kind of somewhat on the lower end, I would say, just above 2%. Now, keep in mind that's like $2,500 fucking move. Like it's not necessarily small, but of course on the other end for the average losing Friday, we do see an average loss of about 1.71%. So as you can see already, Bitcoin has tested what would be the lower end of that boundary here. And by the way, if you have access to this indicator, which comes a part of the Caretaker's Indicator suite, you'll notice that a lot of the time, especially during periods of declining or relatively low volatility, Bitcoin will trade off of the boundaries of this, of this indicator. Anyways, Bitcoin has already hit the bottom end of that, and I think that that's a really obvious and easy area to be looking at for a daily closure that effectively would say, hey, if Bitcoin closes below that on a daily, 117,240, which would be the number, then, we probably have a bit of a deeper retracement here, like obviously. But what I mean is that that's an early indication that Bitcoin's going to very likely come back down to about 115 or so. On top of that, we should be aware that Bitcoin on CME here is doing the same thing. And if that one does break down, I mean, there is still this gap as well at about 114,500. What does that equate to on spot price action? I don't know, like 114 or 113 and a half, something like this. So do be aware of that. If Bitcoin starts to close below these numbers by end of day today, probably a good indication that Bitcoin will, continue down somewhere around that gap fill, maybe a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, but I'd be looking for kind of a nice little knife down around there, and then very likely a bounce, and then we'll come back to it after that. Anyways, moving on from there, I do want to get into some more short-term-ishness here. Now, in yesterday's video, we did call out the importance of the most recent price action pivot at about 120,500 US dollars. Bitcoin actually did close above it yesterday and has come back down from it. So the way that I read that is it's actually a good sign, because yes, Bitcoin did make a new high on yesterday's short term, and Bitcoin now coming back down to that last prior low. Okay. That's fine. We still have the conditions here for an uptrend, but in the short term, the very short term, that is, if Bitcoin closes below already the low of today, which is the most recent price action pivot right here at about 117,500. Again, same thing as what we saw right here for the historical price action statistics indicator. Then we do have some decent downside from there if you're on the shorter term timeframes. Like I said, somewhere around 115, give or take a little bit from that number. Again, these are just relative to the short term. I want to really differentiate between the bi-weekly setups that we were looking at earlier and this. They're not of the same strength, obviously, like fucking duh. 4-hour time frame versus a 2-week time frame. How many 4-hour time frames are in a 2-week time frame? I don't know, but it's a lot. It's a lot more than I can count in my head right now. Anyways, we do technically have this as a rising channel right now. Now that is obviously opposed to what I was stating yesterday. So I do think that this is unlikely to play out in this regard, but hey, this one's about to close very soon in about 10.5 minutes. So I guess we'll see that relatively soon. And if that were to play out as a rising derp, then the implied move would actually be down, into the 115. So, I guess you do have some things right there. But like I said, based off of yesterday's closure above that Wednesday high, this is, in my opinion, a lot more likely to try for a higher low here. So yeah, ultimately, time will tell, I suppose. If we look at momentum oscillators, it actually does favor the downside. So perhaps I should eat my words on that one, because not only is it favoring the downside right now, it's showing downside as long as Bitcoin is below 120, and also playing off this trendline regression rejection here. So now that I kind of look at this, and by the way, a lot of the time I like to do these videos like in the moment, but looking at that, I guess there is actually legitimate potential for it to break down in the short term. So could you see a move down to 115, bounce, and then pop back up over these next couple weeks? Perhaps yes. I would look at that as an opportunity if it were to happen. But yeah, it's getting a little bit more complicated there. I think CME, what's CME doing? Yeah, same thing right there. So yeah, I'd be expecting also a short-term bounce attempt, maybe around 116.5, let's say. Again, these are relatively short-term timeframe stuff, so I don't know how much or how relevant it is to your tastes. Now, I need to bring back up my little notes over here. God damn it, I'm getting all sorts of notifications from bullshit that I don't care about. We have more important Magic Internet money business to get into right here. And I just want to make sure that we're hitting everything. Okay, cool. Yeah, I do think that we've got just about everything there. Yeah, I think that we will save it from there. Of course, if you are following the price action pivots indicator, obviously the trend pivot is going to be, what would this be? The high of the day thus far, like 121 or so. If you're on spot price action, yeah, about 121. If Bitcoin does break above 121, that's at the point where I look for these 2-week time frame setups to, again, kind of govern, general areas of interest to the upside. Until that happens, it's still more or less consolidation. And, heading into a weekend like this, I really wouldn't be surprised if Bitcoin is just kind of like in a holding pattern right now. We don't really see anything like of super great significance. There's one last chart I do want to check here. Like I said, I do want to do these ones in the moment so you can kind of see how my own thoughts evolve about this over time. But let's check out our regular tools here as well. I'm curious to see if there's any sort of hidden bullish divergence building on the shorter term timeframes. And actually there is potential for it. Yeah, there is potential for it here. In fact, again, this 4-hour time frame closing about, just under 8 minutes. If it can actually reclaim the bottom end of this, of this trendline extension right here, I think that would be a good thing for holding in this pattern and putting in another higher low. That would be 118,400 just for reference. And that would give you the potential for hidden bullish divergence, as we are already seeing lower lows on the 4-hour RSI compared to Thursday's low, which was, that 117.5 pivot. So just, keep your, I would be keeping my eyes on these numbers. You can do whatever the fuck you want to do at the end of the day. I'm not your dad, but these would be my thoughts on it. And again, the sort of bias buster right here, still 117.5, Bitcoin below there. Yeah, it's, a little bit of downside for sure. But I suppose we shall see how this one does morph around. Anyways, let's do one last check on the weekly for CME HPDR, because that one is also closing today. Yeah, it's showing 122 as a very relevant level here too. So it does look to me that Bitcoin's probably done doing anything of significance for this week. We're probably going to be waiting around until next week for, any sort of actual move, let's say, meaning that things get more boring, and this is very common typically when Bitcoin closes its first weekly on new highs after a long consolidation, which, this was that on the first week of July. A lot of the time you do see that next week be a consolidation week, and then you get the real continuation. I'll give you an example. If I can find one easily, let's see. Yeah. So back in 2018 to 2021. See this break right here. Oh, actually, no, this one does not go sideways for a while. It just spends a lot of time going sideways underneath. So fair enough. This is some perhaps you see a little bit more on shorter term timeframes. But anyways, getting beside the point right now and probably rambling on a little bit too much. Keep in mind as well that as far as momentum goes on the higher term timeframes, the big pivots for CME tonight are going to be on the weekly for 116,100 and the bi-weekly for 113,600. Again, these momentum oscillators getting into some pretty crazy territories that you don't see too often. Now, that's not generally bad. I mean, obviously you only get heavy momentum to the upside when you're in, a heavy upside move, but it could signal that, again, I don't necessarily think that this one has that much more to go before we get another downside twist. Which can lead to a longer consolidation, I suppose. Anyways, we shall keep our eyes on that number for the end of today. Again, very, very low volatility environment, which is starting to really trend up here. So Bitcoin is, I think if you fast forward about 30 days from now, you're seeing a 30% move from price action, where price action is today, like minimum. Again, I am biased towards the upside as long as all of these momentum oscillators are pointed towards the upside. But we shall see where things close at the end of tonight. And I'll be signing off on that note. As always, I want to wish everyone the best. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully Monday.